So, good morning. Class is now in session. Today is actually our first official podcast to launch class, which stands for CASA's Learning for Advocates, Staff, and Supporters. My name is Kelly, and I work for Wisconsin CASA, and we have a special guest with us here in Madison today. Would you care to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm retired Detective George Chavez, and Kelly and I had the opportunity to meet at a conference up in Sheboygan this past year, and fortunately or unfortunately, I've been involved in a lot of different areas in law enforcement, which have included gang work and technology type work, and also have been pulled into some human trafficking type cases due to the background with technology. So after 32 years of law enforcement, you tend to get well-rounded in what you see.
So, now that you're retired, what are your pastimes?
I've been doing some stuff with my own personal company and doing some consulting work around the country with law enforcement officers and agencies in trying to help them better understand technology, better to understand social media, especially since that seems to be a catalyst for various types of criminal activity, things to look for, how to collect that information and how to utilize that in your investigations. So that's been a primary focus, although because of that focus, it's evolved into other areas of criminal activity. So people will bring me in to talk with me about how is social media utilized in human trafficking and other things.
Okay. So this episode, we will specifically be targeting human trafficking and kind of the cyber portion of that as well. So how did you first encounter human trafficking?
You know, it's interesting when we were in Sheboygan, and I think about some of the casework. There's been a little bit of an evolution when it comes to investigations involving human trafficking. The definition has gotten broader, so as a result of that, law enforcement agencies are trying to determine who's best suited to do these types of investigations, who gets connected with these investigations. So I had worked as a juvenile detective, which for a number of years, so assigned to various high schools in the area, and part of the juvenile detective's responsibility towards the last several years of work with the Madison Police Department involved us being told we were going to be responsible for human trafficking cases, working with other agencies, which included the Department of Criminal Investigation on internet crimes against children cases, also working with various FBI task forces. So it's definitely, for me, it's been several years coming across various cases that we learned were trafficking cases. But as the definition has grown larger, I've found that, dating back to probably 2000, there were human trafficking type cases going on that we didn't define as human trafficking type cases. So people being brought up to Wisconsin that had a status of being considered what people will say is illegal entry into the country, but being utilized and as labor forces and people to go out and do different types of work, the people who would bring them up here would instill fear in them that if they were to report, if they didn't pay what needed to be paid, that could potentially be used against them and they could be reported to law enforcement. So you started to see this group of people that were brought up here who were being victimized, who weren't necessarily reporting, and for us in law enforcement, we really didn't have that connection with them because we weren't hearing about it. Although we knew it was out there and we were hearing about it being out there, they wouldn't directly report to us for fear of what may happen or a consequence with that. So I think back to that, and nowadays when we start talking about how do we define human trafficking, that could have qualified for human trafficking because they were forced into that lifestyle.
So kind of to segue then into what, in this day and age, what is human trafficking?
The definition of human trafficking, obviously, again, has become broader. So, when you're exploiting people for labor services, for sexual services, commercial sexual services, where they feel forced into having to do something that they really don't want to do but have to do in order to meet certain needs for themselves. So you're talking about transporting people from one city to another, one country to another, because this has become even more of a global focus, which has definitely garnered attention not only in the US but in other countries, and how people have been exploited in other countries. And so I think for us in defining it, we're finding that the definition we have even today may continue to get even broader, depending on what types of cases we come across. So as I think about that, I'm thinking about people who are recruited, who are transported, who are forced into doing some type of service for personal gain of someone else, and that they feel compelled or coerced to fulfill that. Definitely defines more of a broader definition of human trafficking today.
Okay. Yeah, that has definitely gotten more broad, because when I initially thought about human trafficking, I literally only thought that it was sex trafficking.
Right, and that's gotten a lot of attention. So I think even for law enforcement, and talking with people at the conference, I think when we even thought of the sexual side of human trafficking or sex trafficking, I always thought of it initially in law enforcement. I think it was kind of seen as prostitution, and what law enforcement was learning was that people weren't necessarily involved in prostitution. They were being forced into this way of life, be it again to fulfill a need, a way to survive, a way to get drugs, where dealers were utilizing people and kind of preying on their habit in order to get them to do certain things. So that got a lot of focus, and it still does today. And I think that law enforcement, as well as other agencies, are trying to wrap their head around the fact that the way we thought about sex trafficking has to change, and the way that we approach it has to change, because there is a distrust with even within the law enforcement circles by people in human trafficking or in sex trafficking, because they think that basically law enforcement is out to arrest them for what they're doing. And I think law enforcement is coming around to the fact that, hey, we need to understand that these are victims, and that they're in need of some resources. And when you provide those resources or provide them the opportunity to understand there are different ways to live, different ways that they can get out, and that you're there to help, to truly help them get out of that situation, that they're willing to help in prosecution of cases, sharing with you the information of everything that was going on. So that is definitely critical to being successful with dealing with any type of human trafficking case, is the cooperation or level of cooperation you're getting from victims. And that's really based on trust, and that sometimes takes significant time, or as we were talking about earlier, it actually means that we, being law enforcement and other agencies, need to work together, because if people don't feel comfortable coming to us, they may feel comfortable coming and talking to you initially, and the rapport that we build together also helps to build rapport with our victims.
Well, and with our agency, we have citizen volunteers who advocate for children. So with their trust of our agency and then our relationship with law enforcement, we would hope that we could bring some of these to light, especially with them having the eyes and ears in the not only the court system, but in these homes every week.
Right, and so you will find that there are certain detectives who are and officers who are very vested in dealing with human trafficking cases, and they are building very deep relationships with people. And again, as I said before, it's a process, a time. It's not like something you can come into and immediately think you're going to get. And that's one thing I would encourage people is that, if you're going to get involved, understand that that's a commitment and that there's a follow-through aspect of that, and that people today understand when people don't follow through because they've seen it so much in their lifetime, that when people do follow through and continually follow through, that definitely builds that trust that you're looking to have with victims. And it makes it kind of sets the stage for all of us to better interact with them and to better provide services for them, because ultimately that's what we're looking to do.
Right. So to switch gears a little bit, when you presented to us in Sheboygan, you had thrown up some pretty profound statistics about human trafficking. Do you just want to plug a couple of those?
Yeah, I think when you talk about statistics, and again, because this is a global issue and not just a U.S. issue, when you think about the International Labor Organization estimated that with human trafficking cases, that it is a $150 billion industry. I mean,
wow.
Yeah, $150 billion industry. And we would probably ask ourselves, okay, well, why are criminals attracted to human trafficking? Because of the money involved, right? As one aspect. And the other issue becomes that law enforcement and prosecutors and the courts are becoming more aware of this type of situation, and the fact that it's still somewhat new. Laws are not always encompassing of everything that you're looking for. So sometimes you have a case where it may not fit the definition of human trafficking, but this feels like a human trafficking case, and you may not have the prosecuting value in that, but there is a human aspect of that that needs to happen. The other thing is that again, the International Labor Organization estimates that 40.3 million victims of human trafficking globally.
Wow.
Right? And you talk about the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children back in 2016 estimated that 1 out of 6 endangered runaways are reported to them, and that they were likely child sex trafficking victims. So as we talked about in the conference, being invited up there, it was to deal with, focus was like runaways, and we're seeing more and more of that. And that's a whole nother topic in itself as
right.
to why kids leave, and how can parents be better to understanding. I'm a parent myself, and I find that there isn't a day that goes by that I'm not learning something.
Absolutely.
Right?
100%.
Yeah, and so, I find that for some parents, they lack those skills of being able to be aware of things going on with their children. Technology has been a huge hurdle, right? Kids are definitely leaps and bounds ahead of where we were. Most of them seem to be born with an iPad in their hands, or an iPhone already attached to the ear. So, there is definitely work to be done. So knowing that and coming each day into the fact that I'm here to learn something, is definitely critical. I was fortunate enough to have several detectives in my department, as well as some of the folks who spoke at the conference, to be connected with and to go to them, because the day that you know everything about everything is probably the day you really need to do nothing. And
right.
I don't know if that day ever exists.
Right.
Exactly. So to be able to find those resources and to be able to look to those folks to help find answers is critical. So I would tell people, be open to asking questions, be open to receiving information, any chance you can get. If we are that sponge, we will take in everything that we can get our hands on.
Absolutely.
Right. So those are definitely some concerning statistics. There's tons that are out there that definitely make me worry, and I know too with the human trafficking and the sex trafficking, that people get focused on females. But I think sometimes the males get overlooked. Anybody who's dealing with any type of emotional or mental health issue, which we tend to see more of today. Our kids are exposed to more things than we ever were, and I don't know if we clearly know what the impact of that's going to be, but we continue to learn that, oh my gosh, this was a little more than I ever imagined. That kids, even when they're being born, are suffering trauma, right?
Exactly.
So I think the more you stay ahead of those things, and the understanding that you gain will definitely help you along any type of journey, be it a human trafficking issue, be it a drug abuse issue. You start to notice those things a lot more, and things that seem that they're connected to something else.
Right.
So
you touched on it a little bit, but what part of the population is at most risk for being trafficked?
I think younger kids, and being older, I hate to admit that, but I think of teenage kids, only because they seem to have a little more freedom with technology, and they're mobile. I go back, and I even think about offenders and predators, as we would refer to them, people who take advantage of potential victims. It used to be, you could go to a schoolyard or a mall, or even a park, and somebody would stand up. There'd be somebody who'd come to the park, and you'd get that, what we refer to as, a coworker of mine would say, JDLR, just doesn't look right, or just doesn't feel right.
I like that.
Yeah. So they would gain your attention, and you'd kind of go, that person didn't seem right. Maybe I need to report that to somebody. Now with technology and social media, predators can go online very easily, and there are things that they look for when kids are struggling, right? Kids tend to be an open book sometimes. They, somebody will say, hey, well, if you don't want to stay home, you come stay at my place. That is huge. That's somebody indicating that home life isn't good. For somebody who is a predator, they can do online grooming. They can reach out to that person and say, hey, I can help you out. I can provide you with things. And again, as we have said before, they're looking for people who are going to follow through. That's who's going to be able to get into them. So if somebody's providing you with food, with the necessities that you may not have at home, food, the clothes that you want to wear, going places that you've never been able to go. I mean, the way they can sell it is pretty incredible. We've started to even see that connection with modeling agencies, right? Mm-hmm. So something that you didn't think about. I remembered being at a conference down in Las Vegas, and hearing this young lady talk about that, and how she was a victim of human trafficking, and how the offender, the predator, the suspect, promoted themselves as somebody who could help them advance, saw things in them that maybe they weren't seeing in themselves. If they were suffering from some type of low self-esteem, they were able to come in and say, boy, you know what, I bet I could get you into a photo shoot or get you on a video, and you just got that look about you, and be able to promote them. And they may be able to come up with like something small, right? Some small photo shoot, or stage something that makes it look like you've been part of some photo shoot, and then come up to you later and go, well, see, I told you, I can get you out there. And they almost want to act like an agent. And in her case, what this offender had done was he had her fill out like an application,
wow.
and list emergency contact information, which was her mother and her father. And then as he was grooming her and trying to get her jobs, he was telling her, hey, you need a portfolio, but they run $5,000-$6,000 for a real professional one, but you're going to need that, right? And he was working on her, convincing her of that. Well, she was a college student. She didn't have that kind of money.
Right.
And he kept telling her, well, you would have all this money if you had this portfolio and we were able to get you out there in a way that we need to. And so he would slowly introduce some things. Like he said, my friend's got a strip club outside, and I know that makes you uncomfortable, but it's only topless, right? And the guys can't touch you. You're like behind glass, so they can't even get close to you, but you can make really good money, $400 a night, and it wouldn't take long for you to get that money for your portfolio, and then you just quit, right? So that grooming behavior takes place, and then as that's happening, she doesn't know that, she's being photographed, she's being videoed while she's up there, because this particular suspect or predator has a relationship with the guy at the strip bar to get that type of video. And then he comes to her when it's time to put her to work. Hey, you wouldn't want mom and dad, mom who's a college professor, dad who's a doctor, to get video, or their friends to get video, or video to get out on the internet of you dancing. So you know what you need to do, right? So she was explaining this, and then I remember even law enforcement officers out there saying, well, why didn't you report it? And she's like, well, what are you guys going to do? You're going to look to arrest me. You're not looking to help me. And that's truly, what they've been told. And she had seen others who now were in the business who had been arrested for prostitution charges. And then the offender or pimp could say, see, that's what's going to happen if you go to the police.
Wow. So I guess in my mind, I always assumed that victims would come from, quote unquote broken families or parents who really aren't present or around. But, in that instance, that woman's parents were, seemingly upstanding citizens, and
right. Yeah.
That just is flabbergasting, because so now we're not only talking about specific socioeconomic statuses, but we're talking about potentially everybody.
Right. And again, because you're talking about a $150 billion industry, I mean, seriously, how can there not be something that's criminal that's attached to that? So as we look at that, I think that's the one really major takeaway is to not think of everything within that box, because there's so much outside the box that is happening that definition is going to change, right? So what we consider human trafficking is going to be even greater than what people imagine. So yeah, in her case, she was a college student. This predator knew that he actually had like 6 different girls who were from colleges, and people who usually can go to college, have parents who can afford to pay for it. And that's where you got to get out of that mindset. Mm-hmm. Now, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of trafficked young people who are in broken families, because that's another reason to go, right? And so, again, trying to find that structure, trying to find that family that may be missing at home, to find those things that may be missing at home. Finally, they're connecting with somebody who they think gets them. And what they don't understand is that they're being used, and that there's going to become a point in time where all the fun and games is going to be over. And now there's going to be an expectation that you're forced into doing something you don't want to do, right? And again, we focused a little bit on the sex side of stuff, but you think of people coming from other countries. I had heard that there was a couple who brought a child from another country, I want to say it was either China, and brought him to the U.S. and promised the parents that they would provide an education for their child, and bring them to the States as, being upstanding people who were trying to help, and come to find she wasn't even enrolled in school. She was being utilized to keep the house clean as a maid service, And so, again, that's a form of human trafficking. And I remember there was a case even with healthcare in primarily some of these nursing homes. Not all nursing homes. I just said in this one was out of Massachusetts, and where these guys were running this scheme. They were 45 and 65 years of age, and they were running a prostitution scheme out of a nursing home, and so it's crazy when you see all the different things that are going on out there, things that you wouldn't normally think could be happening, and again, that's where even law enforcement is trying to get a better understanding as to how do we define it, how do we look at prosecution when it comes to suspects, and to not only vindicate the victims, but now how do we help the victims? Because now there's all this trauma that's occurred, and what resources are available to them to deal with that, I think is significant, and even when it comes time to trial, how do we support them during that, because as we've learned even with children, we try not to re-traumatize people,
right?
And having to have them go back time and time again to explain everything that was going on, is definitely things that I think overall we look at.
So you touched on social media and how that's oftentimes how victims are recruited. Can you touch on that a little bit more and then go into the levels of the internet?
Yeah, so when we talk about social media, I think that sometimes we get caught up in popular social media. So we talk about Facebook, we talk about Instagram, even applications. We're talking about Snapchat, we're talking about Kick, and we fail to see the other ones that are out there. I think the one thing I've learned in even teaching about social media as well as learning about social media is that it just encompasses so much out there. So many different sites that we don't think about, some that came to mind that I shared up in Sheboygan was Moco Space. I got that from law enforcement detectives down who worked in Arizona along the border, and they were finding that was a site that was being utilized for bringing people over the border for both sex trafficking and for labor trafficking. In looking at that, that's not something that people commonly know. So you're going, oh, okay, so that's out there. What else is out there? Well, Badoo, another one. Anything that's social, anytime you can interact on a platform with other people, I think is a social network or a social networking platform. Some creates significant issues in that you can be anonymous, so people don't know who they're interacting with, which can be problematic down the line. So you could think you're talking with another friend who's your same age. Come to find out that was some 37-year-old or 40-year-old who is, again, grooming you to connect with you, building that trust, and those kind of things. So Badoo, Omegle, I think about that. That's where kids get matched up with a stranger, a complete stranger. People may be more familiar with what I would refer to as the adult version, which is chat roulette, and that's where you get online and you just get matched up with somebody online. You never know who it is, and most commonly you're connected with offenders who are in various levels of nudity while they're on there, right? There's a program out there called Yellow that also is being described as a Tinder for young people. Whisper, that one actually has a confession page, and some of these platforms and applications, what can be really concerning is that they're geolocated. So now you're giving up where you're at. So now if I'm looking to traffic people and I want people from, I found a victim in a specific place, or I've interacted with them on the internet in a different way, now that's where I can go get them because I know where they're at. So it may be somebody I'm looking to take from the Madison area, take from here and get them out to New York, where they know nobody, where they're afraid, where they're completely dependent on me, and now I can continue that grooming process, right? So that gets to be a problem. The other thing is too is that you run into different applications. I know a lot of people probably have their kids on Musical.ly, and that specific application was designed for young people, elementary, high school age, and the purpose behind it was to have your kids create these great videos of their musical talent, their singing talent, and everything else. And so parents would say, well, yeah, but I'm watching to see who's watching my kid. Well, what some people don't realize is that those types of applications feed into a live feed, into another area. People don't read the fine print and don't see that Musical.ly is also connected to Live Me. And so now there's somebody who knows that, especially our offenders who go out there and they see on Live Me this kid that they're watching now on Live Me because they know parents are monitoring Musical.ly. So they're still, able to watch. So that gets to be definitely get to be problematic. And as you said before, with Backpage being one of the focuses over the last couple of years as shutting down Backpage and other pages where you were finding ads for young people and finding out that some of that was connected to human trafficking, right? So they're shutting all those down. Now people talk about, well, where are people going? And there's been a concern where people have been talking about the dark web. So a lot of people don't understand, well, what is the dark web? So I'll just kind of scratch on it because, again, that's a whole nother, I think I do 4 hours even with law enforcement just to give them a basis of everything. So when people think of the internet, you think about searchable engines. So you're thinking about Yahoo, you're thinking about Google, you're talking about Bing. And what people don't understand is that those searchable engines only account for anywhere from 4 to 6% of the internet's total capability. All right. So beyond that is what we refer to as the deep web, and that encompasses the rest of that. So 96%, 94% of the internet's capability is in places like unsearchable things to find. So to just kind of, people would say, okay, well, what is that? And I think, okay, so your bank account, I can't go online and go, give me Kelly's balances from her bank account.
Right.
There's a password, there's an account number, there's verification in order to get in. That could be considered deep web content because it's nothing that's searchable. You can't go to Google and say, take me to Kelly's bank account. I'm not going to get that.
Right.
So it encompasses a great deal of that. On the bottom end of that is another 3%, 3 to 5%, depending on who you're talking to, that is considered the dark web. And the dark web is where there's illicit content. So all sorts of things are out there, but there's definitely a market for child pornography, sales, human trafficking, and all sorts of different things. I mean, I think the general public would be shocked if they really knew what was out there, because there's some things that you really don't want to see that are really ugly that are out there. There's talk about sites that deal with cannibalism in another lower level of the dark web, hitman services that you hear about, the drugs, identification. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Anytime you can be anonymous, which is what the dark web allows, can create issues, especially with criminals, because they like to be anonymous, and that can foster some criminal activity. So the way you pay for things even is through what they refer to as cryptocurrencies, and that's not like tangible money. It's actually nothing you can hold in your hands or fingers, but it does have value, and there's a market for it. There's exchanges for it. There's ways to convert US dollars to Bitcoin, which you'll commonly hear about, but there's multiple cryptocurrencies. So not only Bitcoin, Litecoin, Monero, there's just a ton of these different cryptocurrencies that are out there. So it gets definitely very in-depth, but the concern is that when you have a place like that is unsearchable, where people can utilize a cryptocurrency, and it's difficult to trace that money, and that's connected to human trafficking, well then how do you make cases? How do you find those things? And for us, we're definitely learning more about that, and like I said, going into detail, there's just so much as to different things to look for in that whole market. That's probably another conference half day.
And I remember when you presented at the conference, you literally put a picture of an iceberg, and it really helped me to just visualize, like, this is only 4% of the actual internet is kind of what we see all the time.
Right.
And then as you go down deeper into the water, that's technically your dark web.
Right. And again, that dark web doesn't account for very much other than that 3 to 4%, but that's still 3 to 4%, right? And we don't necessarily know what the usage is of that. So that 3 to 4% could be a significant number. I had met a investigator down in Florida when I was teaching down in Florida, and he was in the military, and now he was working with one of the units down there to work on human trafficking, and he was going into different chat rooms. And you got to understand that, again, when we're talking about the internet, we're talking globally. I think some people just get caught up in the US, and so for him, he was finding that these chat rooms that were out there included other countries with their chat rooms and their photos. So it's not impossible to have somebody, and there's been cases out there. Peter Scully is a case that's out there where he was sexually assaulting and killing young children, I think as young as they said 2 years of age, and he was making these videos, and he was doing this out of the Philippines, and those videos were going to the UK, to Germany, to the US, to other countries, to people who were looking for that type of product, and so it's definitely an international issue. And I think what you're starting to see is that countries are starting to come together with that too, and understand that this is not something we can only do in the US. This is not something Australia can't do on its own. It's really got to be a global effort in addressing what's out there potentially and how it's being utilized. And internationally, what are we going to do with it? Because some countries are tougher on how they view human trafficking, and some are not.
Right. So in our homes, with all of these technology sites and applications, what can parents and caregivers, how can they monitor or potentially, keep this at bay?
Well, I think one is of course staying in touch with your child or whoever you're providing with, right? One is monitoring their technology. I mean, I go back to my coworker and friend who used to say, yeah, my kid's got technology, but I trust them, and I think that's where we kind of get hooked every once in a while. I want to be able to trust my kid, and he would say, yeah, I trust my child, but verify, right? So I've seen that some parents give their kids complete access to anything and everything they want to go to on their phone, but have no idea where they're going, and the parents are the ones paying the bill.
Right.
And so for parents and anybody actually, if you're monitoring or given the opportunity to do that, that is part of what you need to do, is to monitor, right? I always think back that the most important job we have is being parents to our children, which, there's that line of understanding and having confidence and trust in our children, but that's a two-way street, right? And I was down in Florida teaching, and a detective came up to me and told me about a program called Mama Bear, and it's free of charge, and it was great because she put this program on her kids' phones. And what Mama Bear does is it allows you access to their text messages, it allows you access to their social media accounts, it even allows you the ability to put into their phone the speed of a vehicle they're in. So if they exceed that speed,
Wow.
I know, if they exceed that speed, it'll notify you. So even if they're a passenger in a vehicle and it's exceeding that speed, they're going to get a notice, and they're going to be able to turn around and say, who's driving, or are you driving? You better slow down. So she was big about that. And what else it did is it allowed parents, if there were certain areas that they knew their kids shouldn't be in, you can kind of put up what we call a geofence. So you can put like a marker around a certain location. And if your kids came within a half mile of that location, you'd be notified, right?
Wow.
And the other things that it does is it allows you to put in certain words that will alert you. So words dealing potentially with human trafficking, words dealing with bullying, those kind of things. So it was definitely a really good program. And she said the agreement she had with her children was if they were to have a phone, that this program would be on their phone. And it will tell you if they're trying to take the program off, because parents will say, well, what if they take it off, and I don't know about it. And it will alert you to that. And she said if my children took it off their phone, the first time they lose their phone for 3 months. Second time they lose it for 6 months, And I know kids can get around that, but again, that trust is a two-way street, and part of our job obviously is protecting our children, right? And it's not necessarily that we don't trust our children. We may not trust the offenders that are out there because they're figuring out ways to connect with our kids and portray themselves as kids. And how are we going to defend against that if we're not plugged into that?
Right.
So most phone carriers too provide some type of plan. But obviously that goes back to getting your child's phone and being aware of that. The other thing I think of is when anyone wants to limit your contact with somebody, and so like let's say you go to a nursing home, and there always seems to be this concern because somebody's taking care of your parent, right? And you go in and they're taking care of your parents. Each time they come in, all of a sudden somebody comes in and says, I need you to go take care of this, and now they become the in-between, and it seems to be happening time and time again. So they want you to limit access to somebody, or somebody's hired and their job is to clean the rooms, and you never see them in the rooms. You always see them back through a door folding laundry or something, and that seems to be where they're at all the time. You may not see them ever getting a break, never interacting with anybody. Those are flags. Why is that going on? And again, it goes back to that JDLR. I think everybody gets it. You get a gut feeling and you go, this just doesn't seem right? So all of a sudden your neighbor gets 4 kids constantly spending the night at their home, and you're going, wow, you would think that their parents might wonder whether, a school night and 4 kids, multiple school nights in a row, and you're going, well, this doesn't sound right. It doesn't look right. What am I going to do? Well, I need to tell somebody about that, And even if it's going to the school and going to guidance and going, hey, my neighbor has these kids spending the night there, I'm a little worried. And what you may find is that you weren't the only one, and others have mentioned the same thing, and there may be some things that are already happening with that law enforcement is tipped on. When you have kids who have little or no supervision, and kids know they can come over to this house and nobody really knows, and they're getting provided with drugs, with alcohol, which is definitely going to lead down a trail of making them defenseless at some point in time, and then who's going to take advantage of them.
So that kind of brings up a question in my mind. So if those 4 kids that are staying at that house, as a neighbor or somebody who wants to speak up, do you talk to the parents, or do you go to somebody in an agency, or I guess to kind of bring it out a little bit, have you seen parents that are actually offenders of trafficking children? What's the safest way for somebody to alert someone to these instances?
I don't know if going directly to them, because again, I don't know what your relationship is with your neighbors and how they'll take that. Sometimes it's easier to have somebody go in between. Law enforcement does welfare checks all the time. So, calling up and saying, hey, that would be a thing I would look at. So if somebody calls and says, hey, I'd like you to come out and check on this house next door. There always seems to be these kids that seem to be over there all the time. And not that kids don't hang out, but I think that, I've seen them there all week, and it's school, and they're up until 11, 12 o'clock at night, and there doesn't seem to be much supervision, right? And you go there, and you go to knock on the door, and people are home and nobody wants to answer. Right? Or you go to knock on the door, and a parent comes to the door, maybe under the influence of something, and you're going, hey, I'm here, because I'm getting a report of some kids that seem to be here a lot. Are these all your kids, And then they're turning around going, wow, there's no kids here. Right? So there are things that you start to identify. So it may be best to contact law enforcement, or it may be best again to get in touch with the schools, a social worker at school, a guidance counselor at school, and that way you keep the police out of it if you don't feel comfortable with that, and you're going to guidance and saying, hey, I just got this concern. I see these young kids. Shouldn't they be in school? I see them there at all hours. I see them during the day when they should be at classes. Is that a problem? And not that every one of those is a human trafficking case, right?
Exactly.
There could be all sorts of things going on through there. The other thing that people could take a look at is that there is the National Human Trafficking Hotline, right? So 1-888-373-7888, or you can text 233-733. And that service is monitored 24/7, right? Or I would think they could get in touch with your agency.
Absolutely.
Right? Or the Department of Criminal Investigation. I mean, they have, like I said, even though it's an internet crimes against children, they are working child cases, right? So there are certain officers that are assigned to follow up on those types of things. I know even with the human trafficking here, Project Respect, and UW actually had one that was out there too that I didn't even know about. It was called Streets Project.
Oh.
And I found that out online, that they're working. So I think there are a lot of different directions that people can go depending on their comfort level. If they feel like interacting with a neighbor, there's nothing wrong with just going over and saying, hey, how you doing? I'm your neighbor. I just wanted to introduce myself, gosh, I see the kids, you must have a lot of kids. And they turn around and go, oh, no, I've only got one. oh, yeah, well, I thought you had several, so I see them out here just hanging out, having fun. And, learning a little bit, what's consistent, what's not. You're going to get those little red flags, and then that may either convince you to report something or to turn around and say, you know what, it's not that, right?
Well, and I think, with the advocates who are listening, if they go in and visit their CASA and see something that, might be some of those red flags, they can certainly talk to their volunteer supervisor, that person that they always communicate with at CASA. And, these programs have very good working relationships with the social workers. So, if that's an avenue that they want to take, instead of calling law enforcement, I think it might, that could also be another way as well.
Right, and it's just looking for those things that just, again, it's that JDLR, just doesn't look right. You go to a house and you're there to help, for some reason, a male child and who's in the house with their mom, and as you're going through the house, you see down in the basement, which is supposed to be their game room, you see all this young teenage female clothing. What's that about? Doesn't seem consistent. Now there's things to start asking. Have you had anybody over? Is any right? And now they're saying nobody's been here. Okay.
Are they doing a clothing drive?
Yeah. Are you having a garage sale? I mean, I don't know.
Right.
But definitely to ask those questions, and they may be tough questions to ask, But my question would be, are they questions we need to ask?
So we've talked a lot about the just doesn't look right. What are just some really quick high level red flags of potential trafficking?
You know, again, when I'm seeing different things is when there's a lot of people in one place, if that makes sense. And when I say that, I'm kind of thinking again of the broader definition, like we talked about before, knowing that there's coyotes that bring people up from Mexico, and they will house them in apartments. You go into an apartment and you go into a bedroom and there's 3 cots, and there only seems to be enough room for just a couple items underneath. I'm wondering, okay, 3 people are sharing this little space, and not that again, it's hard because everybody wants those. Yep, this is a definite. This is a
Right.
definite. This is a definite. I'm thinking that obviously, when you have young, even runaways, meeting people you have not met at undisclosed locations, at the mall, at a pizza place, and then they're gone for weeks. We've had those kind of things happen. That runaway status gets elevated, right? Because now it's more than just a runaway. We've had that where you get somebody who will run away for a couple hours, right, and then they come home.
Right.
A lot different than somebody who's chronically taking off and gone for weeks at a time. So that's definitely concerning and something to think about. Again, just anybody who's trying to limit your contact with somebody or limit your interaction. And I think you can feel that, as though, like, if you're talking to someone and they feel startled by that and they come in and go, oh, you need to go take care of this. I'll take care of this, and really isolating that person.
Okay.
Is definitely, to me, is somewhat of a flag that something's going on. May it be human trafficking, possibly. May it be something else, it might, but that isolating people definitely gets my attention.
Okay.
With those kind of things. Again, where they are, where they're ending up. I had a young man who had come out later and said that he was being trafficked. At first, he was just taking off from a detention facility, and it would make sense. Who wants to stay in a detention facility, right?
Right.
But he was constantly coming back to the same place, which later I learned that it was somebody who was on the sex offender registry, and there was just a lot to it, but there was definitely red flags, again, it's going back and knowing who your kids are with, to identify. I always struggle sometimes with parents who know something's going on, and then they call you and they're like, you'll ask, so who did they go with? I don't know, this red car just pulled up in the driveway and they hopped in it and left. Well, you don't know who that is, and some people might be surprised by that, but there is a lot of that happens, and then when there's not very much supervision at home, people today, in today's society, there's been a push to work multiple jobs, a lot more single parents, so people feel obligated to have to take on the 2 jobs to make up for the lost income. That leaves children unsupervised. What is that appropriate age? Is it, some may think that 8 is old enough. Well, is it? I know the maturity level of my 16-year-old, and I struggle with that sometimes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So when you're looking for those flags, I think that just, again, be open to, if your gut's telling you something's not right, you can always ask more questions. And then if that tends to be more evasive, you kind of get a sense something's going on.
Right.
What it is, you don't exactly know. But when I think of that, then there's probably a need for some type of intervention. with some kind of resource. And if you approach them that way, sometimes they're more open to that. So even if it's not what you think it might be, the possibility of offering resources, I realize it's got to be difficult being a parent today. Did you know about this, which provides cheaper daycare for your children? It's a safe environment. It'll give you peace of mind, because I understand, I don't know how you do it, because we got 2 incomes coming in and we're barely making it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And diffusing that before it gets started, and letting the humanness
Right.
that we all have, let that out, let that come through. A lot of us have experienced and can be understanding to the fact that, this doesn't seem right, and not be accusing people of something. Your approach is everything.
Yes.
Right? No matter what agency you work for, remember that you're representing that agency, right? And as people start to look to your agency, if you're the one that they have contact with and they didn't like the agency, that may have been because of your approach.
Right.
Right? Not in all cases. Somebody may have set that ahead of you,
Right.
but then you have the chance to change that. So it becomes your attitude and how you deal with it. And the other thing is and remember, you might remember this at the conference. There was a young lady who brought up a great point, in that we all have to keep in mind, it's our obligation to teach our kids about respecting others, respecting other people's bodies, respecting, because we get focused in which needs the attention on the victim side and how to respond to that. We don't think sometimes about the prevention side. What kind of interactions are we having with young men to hold them accountable into what's appropriate touching, what's not appropriate touching, what's having proper space, and what's not. I've learned that your mouth, I share this because I am a product of this. Your mouth is nuclear, right? And you have the ability to breathe life or to breathe death into people. That's a choice.
Wow.
And it's very strong, but it's true, right?
Yes.
So the language we use, the way we refer to people, I've seen myself as being overbearing. I've seen myself as using language that is intimidating, and not only at work, but at home, right? And so how we focus on that, how do we be attentive to that, to know, even with coworkers,
Right.
The job's tough, no matter what type of job you're doing, especially when it involves young children, when it involves victims who you see are really hurting, right? That can have great impact on you, and how you choose to approach that, how you choose to approach your coworkers. In law enforcement, you used to hear "buck up," "suck it up," right? As I think back to that, that was very harmful in ways to get people to approach things, because that's not how it always is.
Right.
Right? And to understand that it's really incumbent upon us to take that time to really help our young people understand that they've got to watch the words. Remember, the sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me.
Absolutely.
That is so untrue, right? Because it takes one word to damage esteem. It takes one word to damage trust, right? So as you approach those things, I think it's important to keep that in mind, and to watch your words, to watch what you say, and to know that you can lift people up or you can take people down. That's a conscious choice you can make each and every day.
Absolutely. Well, and I think this is a good segue into when we were at the conference, we were talking about, I think it was one of the questions that I just had, in my mind, just trying to figure out what the heck, why is there such a demand for this? And I think when you touched on the dollar amount, obviously that light bulb went off, but, in teaching our sons and, potentially other women who are predators. How can we try and help decrease the demand for this?
Yeah, again, I think it's got to start on all aspects. When we approach issues, I think one of the best ways to approach it is to focus equally on prevention, intervention, and the suppression component, right? Because you're going to have to deal with that. And so when you take into account all of those things and setting that mindset and changing how we look at people, and especially how we not only perceive others but how we perceive ourselves, right? So this can be how men perceive women, how women perceive men, how women perceive other women, how men perceive other men. Those interactions and the way that we kind of carry ourselves and what we bring to the table really need to be looked at, and there needs to be changes made, right? Remember the whole, I want a guy who's strong enough, but I want him to be sensitive too. Then you get into situations at work where they're saying, don't get sensitive, you got to handle this, right? Or the demand on the fact that women may feel sensitive to something, and at work, not only are they the interaction with a man is turning around and going, I think of Tom Hanks in A League of Their Own. There's no crying in baseball, right?
Absolutely.
Right, and you go, the way we process things are different, mm-hmm. right? And there has to be acceptance of that emotional side. Now, even more so, if you have somebody who's hardened by the things that occur, now that person is even being tougher on you. So if you're struggling with your emotions, and now you end up working with another female coworker who's managed to shut that off and turn around and look at you, now you have another female who's coming to you going, you need to shut down your emotions, mm-hmm. which now that's even stronger, right?
Absolutely.
So what I started to learn is that as a leader, the weight of what we say also is huge.
And parents are leaders.
Absolutely.
When you talked about no crying in baseball, I was just thinking, think about how many times my son has fallen and, scraped his knee or hurt himself doing a sport, and, do parents allow them to cry and express emotion?
Right.
At what age do we start suppressing those feelings, and what does that create in the long run for an adult?
Right, absolutely, and it will have impact. It will have impact. I think back to sometimes where, obviously discipline back in my day was very strict. It was not uncommon for parents to use the belt at that point in time. So imagine being hit with the belt, and then imagine a parent saying to you, you know what, you better stop crying or I'm going to give you something to cry about. And it's not until as of late that I've really started to realize how strong that is. Now you're telling somebody to not associate pain with a painful experience.
Right.
What is that going to unveil down the road, right? So we've really hit on a lot of things that can really create issues as we go along. And those are the things that we're going to have to start changing and addressing, as uncomfortable as it is, mm-hmm. For men and for women, and to understand that I think ultimately what we would like to do is bring the best you possible to the table in each and every instance.
Right.
And that's a choice, right?
It is.
So if that's our choice, I choose to try to uplift, because I haven't done that in the past. So I'm speaking from experience, in that I am learning every day that it doesn't have to be the same, right? So for men, they're saying, well, men are like this. No. men have chosen to be like this. You
Oh,
don't have to
can I
be.
put that in quotes?
Well, I got to throw this out there, so women too. You
Absolutely.
right. But what we learn and taking the opportunity to learn about each other helps us to work through that. And I'm blessed. I'm blessed with a loving wife who has really been patient, has been kind, loving and supportive at times when maybe I didn't feel like I really deserved that.
Wow.
So, but that's a whole nother topic. I could put her up there because she's been wonderful, and again, it's a journey, and we've just got to make that conscious decision. I don't want my son to be thinking that this is okay, that we can rewrite that history, right?
Absolutely. So I think, another thing that we had talked about was, in looking at, the term that you use is predators. In our realm of CASA and child advocacy, a lot of what we talk about is trauma-informed care.
Right.
So are we actually providing the correct trauma-informed care to these predators?
I don't know. Again, it's got to involve that that prevention piece, which is getting to younger kids, because that's when all that learning takes place, and it's never too early.
Right.
Right. Then that intervention piece. So when something does happen, not only are we looking at the victim, but we're looking at the predator or perpetrator, and we have to come to them to get some understanding, right? And how can we change that for them? So what can we offer them? Some may be responsive to it, some may not. I find that I've learned too is that you've got to be in the right place to receive it.
Absolutely.
Right? And sometimes that may take multiple times where unfortunately we meet before you're really truly ready to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But you kind of hope that each chance you get, you plant some kind of seed to make that change. And that's anybody who has contact with them, right? Because I think sometimes we will say, well, you know what, Dad's your best to handle the sons, Mom's your best to handle the daughters. Well, sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's not true, because mothers provide that nurturing that the sons need, right?
Mm-hmm.
And fathers provide that esteem / what a man should provide for their daughter, right? And sometimes if we're not providing that, even at home, our kids are seeing that, right?
Right.
So to get back to that perpetrator piece, we have no idea what their story is, right? I've come to that place too where I'm like, so if I asked you a question, where did you learn about relationships? Where did you learn about marriage?
My parents.
Okay, so if that marriage had some type of dysfunction to it, you've now carried that dysfunction to a place where you've normalized it and maybe not stayed connected with it, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So when I start to look at things now, I'm thinking about that. What got them here? What's that history like? And really how much impact that had, right? Single parent homes, what impact did that have? And how are you going to change the history?
Well, and it's almost like those, maybe like a gap in those areas. How can you help your children understand, the shortcomings that I have as a parent? What can I do to try and overcome that?
Right.
And now we're getting deep.
Right. And it definitely creates self-reflection.
Yes.
And sometimes, you've got to be able to admit to your child, I haven't done this right. Doesn't mean you have to be that way either.
Right.
And being able to do that, because that also lays a foundation that you can make a mistake And that doesn't always define who you are. It's a mistake.
Right.
It only becomes a problem if you don't learn from it, right?
Absolutely.
So that approach, and again, it's taken a long time for me to get here. I always ask myself why it took so long, but it's more about what am I learning? What can I learn to be better and bring the best version of myself to this? And I think as you go forward, knowing that the work you're trying to do, that sets that stage, not only for the people that you're going to have contact with who are victims and possibly suspects, but co-workers and the people around you, right? And again, you want to bring that best you to the table, because that's what everybody deserves.
Absolutely. So, any other human trafficking topics that you feel might be valuable for our CASA network?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and obviously staying up on drug trends, because the drug trends are constantly changing. We're hearing more about synthetics. We're hearing more about what's popular. Kids were great with figuring out different ways to use pharmaceuticals in combining them with different things. K2 Spice was out there for a while, where young people were getting into K2 Spice. It's a synthetic marijuana that they define it as. And gas stations will sell it like a potpourri. And
really?
Yeah, oh yeah, and it's marketed for kids. So you're talking about, they'll call them Scooby Snacks, they'll call them Angry Birds. It almost reminds me of when ecstasy was really big, and the tablets were these bright, smiley faces, the Nike swoosh symbols. I mean, it all seems to be marketed towards young people. You talk about the bath salts. There's just so much. So to stay up on current drug trends is huge.
How can people do that?
Well, there's so much that's out there. I
Okay.
mean, obviously, I know that even in our area, there's a lot of times law enforcement officers will do a presentation on drug trends and what's going on. If they're bringing it even to the school to educate, any way you can educate yourself. You can go online. There's so many places. I mean, with the internet's capability,
Right.
We've seen it on the other side, but there's positive stuff that you can find out there as well. With that, with the drug stuff. Obviously, looking at issues for young people with depression. I think that's definitely a topic, and trauma, knowing that how that extends, or learning more about how trauma extends may make you better able to relate to somebody, better able to handle a situation when you know a little bit more about it. Abuse situations, what's abuse. Cultural issues are huge too, and the one place that I don't think people do enough looking at from time to time with the culture is the music.
What do you mean by that?
Okay, so different music that's out there has different messages, and what it will key into is what is going on.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, so like around tax time, there was a guy who did a song called Drop Hose, and he talks about it openly, about what a drop hoe needs, and and what he was referring to, and again, this goes towards the human trafficking side, is he was referring to women as a hoe, first of all, so derogatory, right, and demeaning, and then in calling her a drop hoe, what he was doing was finding women who would file fake tax refund and fake taxes to get money back, and then they would make money on it. And this was going on, within a gang culture, and it was in the music. So, I mean, everything that you needed, everything you would have to do was
So it was basically like a script.
Yes, as to, and it can be in all sorts of culture, right? It you can hear it in pop culture as to, some of the songs are out there, and how how people refer to women, in what terms, and staying up on that will really keep you in tune with how that's changing. I know technology-wise that there's a couple out there, people will go to the Urban Street Dictionary just to find out terminology, right?
That's a pretty interesting website.
Right, it is. And
you learn a lot.
Yeah, and the terminology, then you go, oh, so that's what that means, right? And again, no matter where you are, there is a way that people communicate that may be different from how you communicate and how you understand. And it's not incumbent upon them to explain it to you. It's incumbent upon you to learn what it means so that you can communicate with them. Right? And I think it's usually the expectation's the other way around. Well, you should know, and you should be able to tell me what I need to know so I can process it in a way that it makes sense to me. And that's where you're getting outside that circle where you're going now and coming to the table and saying, no, it's upon me to learn how you're talking so that I can better interact with you and I can better serve you.
Well, and that actually touches on a pretty important point, because as the CASA network, we have a very large culture in Wisconsin that, we're advocating for kids who come from different walks of life than we do.
Right.
So when we are, as adults, we're trying to advocate for these children, we need to educate ourselves and understand their world so we can best communicate back and forth and advocate for them.
Absolutely.
So I think that definitely is a huge takeaway.
Right, and it takes work,
Mm-hmm.
and I shouldn't say work. I had that conversation with my wife as well, and she likes the word effort. It takes effort.
Oh.
Right? So it depends on how you kind of come at it.
Yeah.
And, and remember that in the work that you do, it's so important that sometimes you kind of go, oh goodness, really, do I have to? Imagine if you turn that around to saying, I get to do this today. The
Absolutely.
attitude and the mindset is completely different, and that's those changes. That's understanding that. Now, how do we translate that to our young people so they're understanding it that way?
Absolutely.
Right? You got to go to school. Do I have to? How do we get our kids to understand that they get to?
I'm still trying to figure that one out.
Me as well.
you get to learn. Well, I don't want to learn, but this is your future,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So one takeaway, just one big takeaway for our advocates.
Think outside of the box. Okay? Don't get caught up in how everybody defines things, and realize that you have the potential to create great things in dealing with situations if you approach it differently, and for leaders to be open to that, right? Be open and understanding that you know what, this sounds really good. Now, they may not take your entire idea, but they may take some of it and incorporate it into how they're working with that, and you've got to say that's a win, right? It's a win-win. So my big takeaway is don't get locked in the box. Take a step out, take those risks in communication, in finding better ways to connect, or in things that you find are working, share. Don't hold on to it, right? Because I think that becomes an issue with knowledge can be power, but if you share it with everybody, then everybody's got that power.
Ugh.
Right?
Can I put that in quotations
Sure,
as well?
you can have that one.
Oh man.
Yes, you could have that one.
So do you want to plug yourself? How can?
I tell people if you want to connect with me, the best way is on LinkedIn. I have mine out there. It's with Chavez Consulting, and again, so my focus is to try to connect with folks and provide information and some of the more law enforcement related topics, but that's expanding. I don't have, and I've said this again, I don't in no way have anywhere close to all the answers. But my hope is that I've got somebody I can connect you with who may have the answers, or who may be able to point you in the right directions. So I like to think of myself as a resource center in that, I appreciate when people reach out, and they do often, and it's like, geez, I don't really have a ton on that, but I may know somebody who does, and let me see if I can connect the two of you. And people tend to build on that, and that's huge. So yeah, LinkedIn's great if people want to connect with me there.
Okay, perfect. Well, so I think that's pretty much it for today. Advocates, if you're listening and you want to get continuing hour credits, make sure you complete the survey and quiz. But other than that, George, thank you for your time, your expertise. As always, it's been great.
Thank you, and just again, I appreciate all the work everybody's doing, because it's not easy. But work together, that'll move things forward.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, and everyone have a classy day.